This is a month later, in April 1942, so exactly 60 years ago. Each one of these lines is a submarine. How they came in, how they came out, all the way down to Trinidad. So look at that. I mean, this is May, June of 1942. That is a lot of activity. So here you have at least 6 submarines here coming through the Northeast Province Channel, Straits of Florida, Key Sal Bank. Other ones coming in here, poking around Acklands, poking around Inagua, Turks and Caicos, Wiberg Passage, Old Bahama Channel, all over. I mean, with this one, literally encircling the Bahamas, and that's in a 1-month period. So it's pretty extraordinary. As you can see, they go all the way to Panama, up to New Orleans. They mined San Juan, for example. They mined Jacksonville. They landed saboteurs south of Jacksonville, Florida, about 8 men. They landed saboteurs, I'm getting off base, but in New York, in Maine, Canada. And these were men that were Americans who spoke German, or Germans who spoke American, and they were successfully deployed. But they had a traitor among them who betrayed them all, and I think out of the 15 or so men, 13 were hung and 2 were allowed to go to Germany after the war. But they really meant business. They were really, this was a terrifying time to be sitting in Florida and watching ships burning off the coast, which literally did happen. They had one ship that burned for 52 days. When you think of the recent tanker spills that last for a few weeks or at most 5 days, 52 days of oil burning off Hobe Sound, Florida. There was a classic story of the Scranton family, aristocrats from Pennsylvania. Mrs. Scranton was finishing a memoir, and it was just finishing around 2 in the morning, and these men rowed ashore and asked her for help. So she went out and gave them food and clothing. And this is when they peter off. They almost stop. Then they concentrate on a different area. They ignore the Bahamas altogether. So anyone who's stationed, like Fort Charlotte, was manned but never got to fire a gun in anger. For these months, the people defending the Bahamas would have been bored. And a lot of whales that were artificially thought to be submarines and were bombed. Anything that looked remotely like a submarine, of course, got a lot of attention. Then they came back in July of '43, so they came back in pretty good force. Here you see a submarine was sunk. Here another submarine was sunk. Another sub sunk. 2 more sunk. So one sunk up here. So you can see the Allies were getting their act together. This is the convoy system, and you might think that it was rather foolish if you predict to the enemy exactly what time. Every Tuesday, for example, at 10 a.m., a convoy left Guantanamo, Cuba. Every Thursday at 5 p.m., a convoy left Key West going to New York. So the idea was that if you were bringing raw jute from India, you could plan your convoy and plan your route to get to England, because the convoys were predictable. They left from Cape Town, they left from Trinidad. But certainly from Trinidad all the way to New York. Trinidad, you went to Aruba, you went to Guantanamo, Guantanamo to Key West to New York to Halifax. So here's the lines. So it was interlocking. So it actually made a lot of sense. And that's lanes, and that they duck into port at daytime and sail to avoid detection. So it made a lot of sense because it regularized it and was predictable, and if there was no ships to sail, then the convoy didn't sail. But that's essentially how the Allies won. They didn't give the Germans targets of opportunity. So this gives you an idea of the actual ships that were sunk. And I'm writing a book about it, and I decided instead of writing about 130 ships, I would just choose the 10 women in the For the Bahamian perspective, this stuff is happening 200, 300, 500, 700 miles away. You can't hear it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it. There's no sensory idea that this is happening. It was suppressed in the press. If it was mentioned in the newspaper, it would say, men from an Allied ship landed on, no further details are allowed. But people were certainly aware when they had, in the month of March alone, they had 200 men landed here. In April, another 50. In Nassau, as you can imagine, 250 skinny sailors talking in the bars. The word would get out. But this was the Dutch ship, the Signet, off San Salvador. The Anglo-Saxon was sunk by a cruiser before the U-boats, so they landed in Eleuthera. The Daytonian was a British ship that was sunk off Eleuthera by the same Italian submarine. Sorry, it was north of Eleuthera off Abaco. The Apple Queen was a British tanker, and the submarine, the ship fought back. The submarine panicked and dove, and actually hit the ship and disabled the torpedo. So the submarine that had sunk 6 ships in days was out of the war, was affected. So that was very brave of that to counter that. The Wiberg, which is a large ship sunk in the Bahamas, that was a Norwegian tanker. That was sunk off Abaco. They landed in across Harbor Echo and were taken by Penn to Nassau. The same with the Apple Queen. They landed on their own at Hopetown. 3 men died rowing to shore in the reef, and they were buried in Hopetown. And they were taken by the Content S, which was a government schooner or government power vessel, taken to Nassau. The Signet were taken from San Salvador on the Monarch of Nassau, which is a passenger ship, over to Nassau. And by far, the Vineland was Canadian. She was brought ashore. They went ashore in Turks and Caicos. The Vivian P. Smith was a Barbadian schooner. It was taken to Turks and Caicos. Abgara went to Cuba. The Fauna went to Turks and Caicos. This is the Americans lost an airship over here, and that was the only, they lost 1 man. That was the only time in the war that a German submarine sank a U.S. airship and destroyed it and killed the guy. Up here, the patrol craft, actually I learned later, was sunk at Bimini. That was a converted yacht, the Pleiades, that was given to the U.S. and was lost in 10 months at Bimini. But the Kolskeg was lost way off Hatteras, but the men were nevertheless brought to Nassau. So this just illustrates the timing. So you can see there's a peak in activity in sort of March, April, May 42. The top is how many German patrols there were. The bottom is how many Allied ships were sunk. So you can see there's very, more subs, more ships sunk. No subs, no ships sunk. The more subs come back a year later, more ships are sunk, and then it flatlines to just 1 ship in 44. So, the submarine patrols, you'll notice that the patrols continued, the sinkings tapered off. There was only 1 sinking. So if you could look at it this way, a lot of effort, but a huge result. A lot of effort here, and really quite a small result. But the more subs, obviously, the more sinking. This is my favorite picture from a Bahamian point of view. Some of you may recognize that's Wallace Simpson in the middle, the Duchess of Windsor, whose husband had been King of England, King Edward VIII, I believe. And Pericles can tell me exactly, but this is a Greek Bahamian nurse, volunteer with the Red Cross. This is said to be Marion Carstairs, but if you look carefully, she's wearing white shoes of a nurse, and Marion Carstairs would not.
It's not Marion Carstairs.
It's not. Yeah, her niece says it's
Absolutely
definitely not. So the caption says no, and Kim Francis Arena says no. So besides the way she's dressed, it's just not consistent with Marion Carstairs, having just rescued this man from the ocean. So I've been in touch with Carbotti's. This is Kaplan. His son is in Japan now. He changed his name to Stark. I got a phone call. His 2 children. Recently, he died in 1988. This guy was Italian, Carbotti. This is Kaplan, and he had tan skin, so he gave his shirt to Mo, the Norwegian, who was much more fair. Just little details like that. You can see their feet are bandaged up. But basically, a nurse, Wallace Simpson, who was in charge of the Red Cross, and probably another nurse without a hit here. These men survived 32 days, and they were rescued by Marion Carstairs on her speedboat Virgimere, which we'll see more of. This is a photo of Captain Di Cassato, Count Fece Di Cassato. He took his own life when the Allies signed up with the Italians. He was very hurt that the noble family wouldn't accept him into their court and were dealing with what he considered the enemy. The Navy was, he actually fired on the Germans and did his duty, but he found it very confusing and overwhelming. He was a young unmarried man, and that was it for him. On the right is the schooner, that Sherwood Archer. They said everything from a thumbnail to a Band-Aid to a diesel engine he could get you in Nassau. That's the schooner on the right. This is the launching, thanks to Kim Arena. This is the launching of the Virgimere, which is a truly Bahamian vessel. That's in Whale Key, where they had a cannery and they had all kinds of innovations Marion Carstairs developed. She was the somewhat, I think most would agree, somewhat eccentric heiress of the Standard Oil Company, and very strong-minded. She had a women's livery company in London that was women-only chauffeurs in the 1920s. She drove an ambulance in the First World War. She volunteered to go to Europe and bury the war dead after the First World War, which must have been a truly ghastly job. So really a woman of steel. And she volunteered for the British Navy, and they said, wrong gender, wrong war. So she did everything she could to help, and it included rescuing 47 men from Athens. And in characteristic fashion, she flashed them at night. She flashed with a light. She said, "You are rescued." She found them at night and said, "You are rescued," and took them aboard. They were all very grateful. There was a rumor that these 47 men had been at sea for 32 days because she dressed in a tomboyish fashion. The rumor was that they weren't even aware they'd been rescued by a woman. And I spoke to several survivors, and they said, "Yeah, no way. Every guy who's been at sea for a month and a half is going to be fully aware that they're in the presence of a woman." So they didn't let that one pass. This is a ship sinking, and you can see, this was in the Bahamas area, and you can see the airplanes up on the deck. This was going to Basra, I think Iraq. There are tanks, there are tractors, all kinds of valuables that were, it's kind of sad, but a lot of the supplies that were being brought to the Caribbean bases to defend the Caribbean against the Germans were sunk by the Germans as they went there. And there was a rubber shortage in Germany, so the survivors thought it was kind of odd that instead of shooting them, the Germans would go through the wreckage and collect inner tubes and tires so they could bring it back as trophies. On the left this is a bit of a sad story. All of this activity, there's no physical evidence. Not one of these ships was sunk in the territorial waters of the Bahamas. Even the one 4 miles off San Salvador was the territorial waters, but it was 4,000 fathoms. So you can't go scuba diving, you can't go skin diving, you can't find relics. The men were badly needed by the war. So as soon as they'd spent a couple of weeks in Nassau, or a couple of days, they were flown off the island. They were taken by Betty Kay, the Ina Kay at the time, who was the sister of Betty Kay, taken to Miami, and that was it. They didn't father any children here. They didn't settle here. So the only evidence we have is these 5 graves, which is 3 British down. And this is the grave of Olaus Edwin Johansson Gex. And I put an ad in the Liverpool Chronicle in England because I knew that one of his children